Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, whatever time you are tuning in. Welcome to Homesteading and Gardening in the Suburbs. I'm Emma from Misfit Gardening. And, well, I finally started my onions, some kitchen herbs, spinach and salad greens all indoors. I've been saving various containers like plastic yogurt pots, sour cream tubs, cottage cheese tubs, stuff like that my husband and my stepson have eaten, to then fill with seed starting and potting soil and sow some seeds, right? I always kind of get like this around this time of year because I want to see things growing. And even though I have been growing gourmet mushrooms, which has been a first for me, I've never grown mushrooms before. And I found a local company out here in Maine that had some kits. So I've been trying those for the very first time, which has been very fun and very delicious to eat them. But this week on the homestead's been a real challenge, from busted frozen pipes in my stepson's apartment and flooding to rodents. And luckily, I've got, my work job, crochet projects and learning to quilt to all keep me occupied. And there's been some really cool things that we've seen. We've seen foxes on the homestead and some interesting cat prints, which are huge. And I'm starting to think it's probably a bobcat. So hopefully we'll pick something up on the trail camera, but maybe not, because we've been doing a lot of stuff with chainsaws and things over the last few days. So maybe we scared it off. But this time of year is usually when my seed starting really kind of starts and my planning really seems to, finalize and hone in. So I kind of wanted to talk a little bit about some of the seed starting things that I do, because I can't be the only person that's going a little bit crazy from just looking at snow and wanting to do something. So indoor salad leaves are really easy to do. You just take a container that can hold some soil, fill it with a seed starting or a potting soil mix, and then sow a little bit of salad leaves. You could use a mixed leaf salad so you get a bit of variety. I love these. I love the diversity of the leaves that you get. They look pretty. I really like to do that. Or you can just keep the same variety if you want to. My husband really likes Bib lettuce, so I've got a box that's just full of Bib lettuces for him. I like the mixed greens, so I've got different, I've got reds and greens and different lettuce colours all together that are then sown. But it's really easy because you just water your seeds and you should start to really see little seedlings in about a week if you keep them somewhere warm. I really like to reuse those plastic boxes that my salad from the store came in. The clear lid is really great at keeping things humid, which helps germination. So it's kind of fun to see because you can see the roots growing down and then you can see the salads growing up. They're in a nice, easy container, and then you can clean it out and recycle it afterwards, which is kind of neat, right? And once your salad's up and growing, you just pop it somewhere warm and sunny, or if you've got grow lights, pop it under some grow lights and just harvest the leaves for a salad when they get big enough, right? This is a really great way to do kind of those cut and come again type of salad leaves where you go in, you snip a few leaves off for a salad, and then, a couple of days later you come back and do the same thing. But you can do this kind of technique with lots of different vegetables. Like you could do it with radishes, you can do it with spring onions or scallions, even baby leeks, right? You can do it with baby leeks, different herbs, right? What are some of the other things that I've done them with? I've done them with kale, like baby leaf kale, or even beets for a beet salad, like just something to be growing, right? There's something kind of, happy about having your hands deep in some soil and, working on planting something that's going to then feed you in your garden. And I mentioned kitchen herbs. Kitchen herbs are always great. And we've started basil, Greek oregano, sage and rosemary. And I start them in yogurt pots or a sour cream container, whatever it was, that was washed out. And, I just fill it with the seed starting mix or potting soil. Always make sure that your seed starting mix or potting soil is moist already. Like if it's dry, put it in another container and, pour on some warm water, mix it up and then just let it sit for a couple of hours to allow the water time to actually get absorbed by that medium, because that's going to help your seeds, because your seeds need that contact with the moisture and that growing medium to be able to germinate and thrive. So, I'll kind of prepare, the soil on an evening and then just kind of let it sit overnight, and then come in the morning, it's, usually ready to use. So I'll just kind of fill up a container, sprinkle some seeds on, give them a little pat down so they're not going to disappear anywhere, spritz them with water again, and that's pretty much it. Sometimes I'll put a plastic bag over them to help keep the moisture in after giving those seeds a little spritz of water with a sprayer. That does help because it keeps the moisture levels up, and it helps with aiding that germination, as does using heat mats and things. And I did a whole podcast episode about seed starting tips that you should definitely check out if you've not heard it before. It's going to be all of my seed starting tips together, so definitely, if you've not heard it before, take a little bit of time, definitely get some paper and a pen and a cup of coffee or a cup of tea, and listen to it, because there's a lot of info that's in there. But this is stuff that I do all of the time, and I've had a lot of success with doing these. And you don't need a lot of fancy equipment with seed starting. I have it now because I'm, more honing into gardening for providing for my family and providing for me. It's not, I've kind of made that move from it being a hobby to it's going to feed my family. So there's a different kind of mentality that went with that. But fresh herbs are incredibly expensive at the grocery store and are really easy to grow at home using recycled containers. So if you've never kind of grown anything before and you're kind of wanting to try, then maybe try some fresh herbs, right? You can use them in the kitchen. They're there every day, and you're going to be able to see them and nurture them. And, a lot of people who start with kitchen herbs then sort of get the bug to start growing a little bit more. I love growing kitchen herbs. It's a really great thing for me to do with my family. I get my husband involved, hey babe, what herbs do you want to grow? Because, he likes to cook all the time. So I want to make sure that I'm growing things that he's going to use. But also with slightly more woody herbs like sage or rosemary, when they get bigger, you can put them into a bigger container, or you can even transplant them outside after the frosts have passed, somewhere that gets a lot of sun, and you can start a herb garden outside. We use a lot of very similar, herbs and things. We have a lot of thyme that's growing kind of wild in our garden. We'll find patches of thyme in the grass that's out there, randomly around the property. You'll kind of walk through. It's do you smell thyme? My husband's why does it smell like Sunday chicken somewhere over here? It's oh, there's a patch of thyme here. So I've not grown thyme here because we've got so much of it. But, when I was in Utah, we had a little thyme garden that we'd created for growing, stuff indoors because we used it so often. So I would recommend, if you're wanting to do kitchen herbs, do things that you use a lot of and things that are expensive. I use a lot of basil, and it is really, really expensive. And when I buy it in a packet, I'm not able to use all of that packet before it goes, all brown and wilty and moldy. Sure, it goes into the compost bin, so it's not totally wasted. But when you're paying $4, $5, $6, in crazy prices for kitchen herbs, and I know that I can get a packet of seeds for less than that and I can grow more, I'm starting to lean more to growing more of them. But it's a way that you can help curb that I want to get something growing craving, right? On the homestead. But winter's also a really great time to, think about or even start some building projects, making a cold frame. Even though it is, winter, we're coming up to the end of the year, right? Having a cold frame might be one of those things that you think that you've totally passed the boat on. Like, it's already snow outside, Emma, where I am. Why do I need a cold frame? Well, a cold frame is going to help you in spring be able to, transfer plants that you've already got started out somewhere that they're going to be protected, that they can get used to the temperatures and things outside. It's called hardening off, and it helps them to acclimate to where they're going to be planted. It also offers you an opportunity if you put them over an area where you're going to be gardening, where you can start to warm that soil. You can get things out in spring up to 6 weeks earlier than you would if you didn't have some level of frost protection. So I am going to be driving my husband nuts, because I'm probably going to be now on the lookout for windows, like old windows, old shower doors or screen doors, anything that's like glass, or even if there's that kind of polycarbonate stuff kicking about. Like, if we find anything like that, I'm going to be asking to take it home so I can use it to start making cold frames. I've been doing a lot of reading about 4-season gardening. There's a brilliant author and farmer up here in Maine, and those of you that have been kind of like looking at gardening and garden extension, you will probably have come across Elliot Coleman's book at some point, and it has just been a treasure trove of information. And some of the techniques I was very much used to using, like cold frame growing and stuff, in the UK, but the extent that he's kind of put things together was kind of mind-blowing. So like, we've been looking a lot at some of these kind of projects for, the upcoming season, but being able to get things out in the ground earlier, especially in a short season area, is very, very worthwhile doing. And building projects like making a cold frame or, things like that are not necessarily things that need to be expensive, especially if you can find reclaimed materials. Another great thing to do over winter, if you're trying to organize your shed or an existing greenhouse, is maybe look at projects like building a potting table, or things where you can, organize your seed starting trays, your pots and your seed starting mix, or, building some shelves maybe that you can get your seed starting started. That's wow. Imagine trying to say that one after you've been to the pub. Seed starting started. But a way that you can, get your trays sort of organized into the greenhouse, so they're going to be able to get a lot more light. Or if there's areas where you're going to be transplanting things into the ground in a greenhouse, how are you going to be best using those space? And, that's one of the things that I kind of miss from Utah, is being able to go out into the greenhouse, even though it is freezing cold, there's tons of snow on the ground. In the greenhouse, I still had things that were growing and, they were being harvested throughout the season. And I kind of miss that now that I don't have that. So I've already got my mind set on, season extension and some method of organizing things. In milder areas, December and January are when apples and pears are traditionally pruned. So you want to be pruning out things that are dead, damaged and diseased, but then also looking to prune to open up the structure of your trees to be able to get more light through, so you can improve the harvest. But whilst those things are all going on in the milder areas, here on the homestead, I'm working on starting my onions over the new year. Onions take long, slow time to grow, and I want to really be able to hit the ground running in the garden that we have, because there's going to be a lot of moving pieces in a short period of time as soon as that snow thaws. But whilst I've been working on starting those onions and looking at, over the new year, what's coming up, I've been working on my seed starting calendar, taking time to plan when different varieties are going to be started indoors and getting those dates on a calendar so I don't forget, right? We're all super busy people. Like, I forget my wedding anniversary on a regular basis, right? If it's not on a calendar, like, I tend to kind of forget things. I've forgotten my own birthday. Like, I've forgotten tons of stuff because we're all very busy and we're thinking about other things. So, winter. There's not a lot kind of going on, outside necessarily, but it's a good time to kind of sit down, have a cup of tea or coffee or whatever, and, get things scheduled, right? Pull out a calendar for the next year or a diary and write in like on the days that you're going to be needing to start seeds, get those dates written in, or, you need to transplant your seedlings out on this date into the garden. Like, get things scheduled. Some people set reminders on the phone. Others like to do a calendar. Do what works best for you. I have a calendar and I will be transferring all the dates onto that calendar once I finally figured out what some of those dates are going to be for the varieties. It's just easy for me to have a look at it because it's right next to my desk, and I can just take a look and be like, oh, hey, tomorrow morning I've got to make sure that I sow, I don't know, these peppers or, the celery or whatever, and I can make sure that I'm going to be kept on track. I spend a lot of time over the last couple of weeks going through my seeds and really creating an inventory of what I had, as well as things like the days to maturity. So how soon, is it going to be from starting that seed to a potential harvest, right? I also looked up and figured out how soon seeds could be started indoors, or, did they have to be started outdoors? How many weeks before the last frost in spring could they be started? Some things could only be started 2 weeks before the last frost date, others 4 or even 12. Some couldn't wait and be started until after the last frost date, right? So I spent a lot of time planning that out. And because I work with spreadsheets all the time in my day job, I decided to basically create a calendar and a schedule and an inventory kind of all on as one on one of those, right? I can sort it based on the month and, what the plant is, so I can kind of drill down what my seed starting activities are going to be, right? I can, sort it by peas, and I can see all the varieties of peas that I have. I could sort by, I want things that are going to take less than 90 days to maturity, and I can pull up everything that I have that's going to be, viable in a short season. Or I could look at things that are greater than 120 days, and I could say, okay, these are seeds that I'm going to swap with other people because they're not going to be viable for my climate, right? It's just been a good way for me to kind of figure things out. And I'm, that kind of nerd, like my analytical brain, like loves organization, right? Not necessarily going to be for you. I get that. Okay. But there's other people that are going to be listening that are going to be like, oh, I want that spreadsheet, right? It's not pretty. I won't lie. But it's functionable, and it's something that I work on. Each year I kind of think of other things that, kind of get added to it that make sense to me and how I plan. But this particular spreadsheet works great for known varieties of seed, right? Let's say you've got King of the North sweet peppers or Wethersfield red onions, right? But when it comes to things like landrace varieties where there's a lot more diversity and variability, that's where keeping really good notes for your garden comes in. So in my garden journal, when I start seeds, I write down when I started them and what they were. Right? Yeah, sure, I'll make, little notes on the labels and stuff, but I always lose the labels of things. Always. And, my husband was like, why don't you just write on the top of, the dome that goes on the modular seed trays? And I was like, because they don't stay with the seeds, you'll take those off, as the seeds get bigger. And he was like, oh, so how do you know what goes in there then? And that's when really careful notes kind of come into play. So sometimes I'll take a permanent marker and I'll kind of mark, the seed tray, and I'll kind of, grid them off so I know what things are. Other people, make little plant labels and use those. Other people have a note, a sheet underneath that will say what things are. Bits of masking tape have been really great. Those I've just kind of stuck to the side of things before. They've been very helpful. So there's lots of ways that you can mark things off, but I always like to write it down again in my journal. And this is helpful if you're doing, 1 or 2 varieties, so you can kind of write down what they are. But it's equally important if you're writing down things that are part of like a breeding project, or if you're developing a land race, right? So I'll make notes on when I start the seeds. I'll make notes on when I start to see germination, when seedlings are potted on into larger pots, if they do, you know, if I move, let's say tomatoes, right? I'll start those off in those teeny weeny little modules, and then maybe I will move them into, you know, a large like drink cup or something, so they've got a chance to grow a little bigger. I'll write down when I do that. I'll write down when they start to get hardened off, or I, you know, start putting them outside to acclimate, because it takes about 10 days to be able to do that. I'll write down things like the dates that I transplant varieties and plants into the garden and where I put them. So did I put them in bed 3, or did I put them in bed 4 or bed 1, right? And I will write down when I start to see produce to harvest, because I then go back and use that information from my garden journal to then work out how many days from starting the seed to harvest, or how many days from transplant to a harvest things are going to take in my garden. And you'll find as you start to do this kind of activity that, you know, the days to maturity that you'll see on the back of a seed packet are very much variable, right? If you see 60 days to maturity, it might be 55, it might be 60, it might be 63, it might be 65, it might even be 75 or more, depending on where you are in your growing conditions and your climate, right? The days to maturity are usually an average, right, of different growers that have put into be able to kind of come up with this number for the seed companies. Some seed companies don't even bother to put on a days to maturity. Baker Creek Heirloom Seeds, a lot of their seed packets don't have days to maturity on there because it's so variable and dependent on where you live. But that's, you know, one of the great things about having a garden journal is having those notes to be able to go back to. And, you know, as you start saving seeds and developing a landrace project, maybe you're starting to select plants that are producing earlier, right? So you're starting to select plants for earliness, right? Or maybe you're wanting plants that are producing later. So you're wanting things with a longer growing season, right? So you're starting to really kind of hone in how you want your garden to grow by seed saving. So that's one way that you can use this kind of tool if you're developing different varieties. So for those of you who are planning to be self-sufficient from the garden, you might be thinking, what about fall crops when it comes to this old spreadsheet thing that you got there? The same kind of idea applies, right? You know, where you were basing your starting dates from the first frost, or the last frost, in spring. For fall crops, you're basing it on the first frost in fall. So you would use your first anticipated fall frost date and then work out how many weeks before that date you would need to transplant your seedlings into the garden, and then give yourself 2 weeks, 4 weeks, 12 weeks, however many weeks before transplanting to start those seeds off, right? Some varieties like peppers, for example, can take a long time to germinate because they have to have certain soil temperatures and things, or, you know, certain amount of light to trigger that germination. So it just depends. But I then, you know, use the math to basically create a sowing date for fall. So I call it like the last sowing date or something like that. And I know for, let's say, for carrot varieties that I grow, the last chance that I have to sow carrots for a fall harvest, depending on the variety, is between July 12th and July 24th. So if I've got a variety that's got a shorter or a lower number of days to maturity, let's say 65 days, I can sow that on July 24th. But if I've got carrots that take 90 days, then I need to be sowing them on the earlier date, right? The 12th July date, right? To be able to have a harvest. Knowing your dates for sowing and expected harvesting can help you get more from your garden space and help you plan your garden better. You can prioritize like early spring garden space for really fast growing crops with lower days to maturity to be able to have a harvest or two out of the space before those longer growing summer vegetables or even your transplants for fall are going to be needed to go into that space to have the time to grow. Or you can use the information to extend your harvest of that crop, like corn, for example. You could grow an early variety of corn with a low number of days to maturity, a medium season variety or a mid-season variety, and then a late season variety that's got a longer or larger number of days to maturity. You could start these varieties in the garden at the same time, and they're going to grow to different, maturity over a different period of time. So let's say that your early variety is ready in 75 days, then your mid-season variety is ready in 90 days, and then your late season variety is ready in 120 days. You've extended your corn harvest from 75 days to 120 days. That's way more time that you've got and more produce that you're able to get out of your garden just by basically hacking the dates to maturity for your garden. You don't need to use a calendar or a spreadsheet to garden. You really don't. Like, I know gardeners who buy transplants from the nursery, they plant them on Mother's Day in Utah or Memorial Day here in New England and never worry about seed starting and planning other than where each row of veg is going to go in the garden. And there's nothing wrong with that either. But for me, the garden is going to be my primary food source. I'm vegetarian and I'm challenging to really have something from the garden throughout the season. And because this is my primary food source, I'm taking a lot more care to plan it. So I'm going to have food from the garden. I'm obviously going to have to change my cooking and thinking along the way. And hopefully my waistline's going to go down as a result of this experiment too. But when you start to kind of make that move from being a hobby gardener to it becoming a lot more critical, you're starting really to kind of plan things in, right? I know I'm not going to be able to have apples year round, for example. I know that, there's different produce that thrives better in early spring or fall, like peas, for example. When it gets too hot, peas don't produce anymore and they get all mildewy and die. There's other crops that do better in the hotter weather, right? There's crops that do better when it's slightly cooler, right? There's things like that I will then factor into account for my seed growing and my garden planning. But when it comes to winter and everything being cold and covered in snow, certainly here in New England, this is a great time to really, have a cup of tea and dig out gardening and homesteading and even smallholding books to read and brush up knowledge on, right? I like to peruse old gardening magazines and even watch a couple of videos to get inspired for the garden in 2022 and kind of figure out what is it that I could do a little bit differently, and have I thought about this for my plan, or do I want to try something different? So I would love to hear from you. Let me know in the Facebook group what has got you inspired for the garden next year and what your favourite garden planning tools are. Until next time, I hope your garden grows beautifully, and I'll see you all next week.